Alright, so let's continue here. I'm going to focus on the TV and a few of the other electronics here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the edit menu. I'm going to grab the transform toolbox. That's going to allow me to work with pivot points a lot faster and easier. Okay, so the pivot points of all these objects are not where I want them to be. So I'm going to take the pivot point of the TV here, okay, and I'll place it at the center. What I'm going to do next is I can use this align pivot options down here to place the pivot point at the minimum and max, at the center or the origin of the scene, and I can also choose to align it in the X, Y, and Z. So for example, if I choose the minimum and then I choose X, it's going to place it back here. Okay, if I choose max and choose X, it's going to put it on the opposite side, on the farthest side of positive X. Okay, so minimum takes it to the negative, max takes it to the positive. So again, minimum, X takes it to the lowest point in the X, max takes it to the highest point in the X of the object. What I'm concerned with though is placing this in the Z. So I want to place it at the minimum Z so it goes all the way to the bottom. If I look at this, the pivot point is right at the bottom of the base, which is going to make it much easier to position as well as to scale this guy down. So if I scale him down, I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to snap him to a vertex back here. I'm just going to pick one like that one right there. So it basically snaps right there. And then I'm just going to scale this guy down. If we use the transform typing tool, we can scale this down pretty easily as well. I'm going to move him forward. I'm going to make sure I turn snaps off. And I'm going to scale it up. And I'm going to make it so the TV takes up most of the space right there. So we went TV shopping and we found a TV that fits perfectly right in there. Isn't that amazing? Okay. So now let me do that for the other objects here. Let me move a little bit quicker. I'm going to move the pivot point to the center. Then I'm going to choose minimum, Z. Then I'm going to take this guy, snap him to some vertex in there, start to scale him down. Snap this guy around, try to get him positioned properly as best as you can. Now I'm just going to scale him down. Place it maybe in this shelf. You could place it in any one of these shelves or areas you want. I'm just going to put it right there. So you could follow me or you can just branch off and do your own thing. I'm going to take the pivot point here, move it to the lowest point in the Z. I'm going to place my Blu-ray player over here. I'm going to take the scale, knock it down to about this size right here. I'm going to continue to scale it down, something like this. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let me see what else I've got. I've got this other stuff over here. Now, the picture frame for the table, I'm not going to mess with the pivot point. I actually like where the pivot point is. For the wall object here, the wall picture frame, I don't like where the pivot point is. So I'm going to center it first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place it the minimum in the Y, so it places it on the back of the picture frame, which is going to be easier for positioning it on a wall. So let me take it and actually do that. Let me rotate this guy 180 degrees this way. Let me just make sure it's 180 degrees. Okay. I'm going to move him back against the wall here. That's not bad. I'm going to take the scale here. I'm going to reduce its scale down because it's too big of a picture frame. And that's a pretty good size right there. I'm going to say I'm happy with that. Just going to place him on a wall at random over there. I'm going to take this picture frame here. I'm going to kind of snap him there on some vertex. Then I'm going to scale it down to about this size, like this. Maybe a little bit more. Place them right about there, and yep, looks like it's right on top of the surface. The DVD object, I think the pivot point is actually good. I'm going to scale this guy down as well. Try to get me something that looks a little bit more like a DVD size box or case. So I'll just place it like this. And I think for the size, I think that looks pretty good for the size. So I'm gonna say I'm happy with that. Okay, the clock over here. Let's go ahead and move the clock into position. I'm going to scale down the container object here for the clock. Now I'm going to place it up here on top of this piece of furniture right up here. I just think it kind of looks appropriate, and maybe I'll rotate it a little bit so it's at a bit of an angle so it looks a bit more realistic. Remember that randomness looks more realistic. If things look too uniform, they won't look realistic at all. Okay, so that's done right there. Now let me come over here and take these books here. Let me isolate the selection. I'll go into a front view here. Let me remove the transform toolbox there. I'm going to take all of these guys and I'm going to just lower them a bit. I'm going to pretend like this grid line right down here is the surface of a table or something. Just to make it easier for me to move this stuff. You can see that it's not positioned correctly. So I'm just going to take it and quickly position this stuff the way that it should be. Yeah, some of this stuff was just way off. Way off. Right. Let me actually look at this from a back view. And this stuff, for example, right here should be right there. That guy should be right there. I'm going to take all of this and move it here so it's barely touching that. I guess I must have quickly positioned this stuff when I first made it. So that's why it's off. And I'll just move that stuff, move this stuff right there. Move this stuff right there. Just make sure everything kind of looks like it's touching, just so it looks more realistic. Nothing worse than doing a render with something that looks like it's floating in the air or something like that. It just completely destroys the realism of a render, which is obviously no good. And right here, I might move this in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to say that I'm happy with that. Alright, let me exit the isolation mode here. Go back to a perspective view. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these books, except for maybe this one right here. And I'm going to parent these guys. So I'm going to select the link tool. And I'm just going to drag on top of the book that's in the middle. This big one, which is the biggest one. Now what that means is if I move that book around or I scale it, all of the other books are going to scale and move around based on that one. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into position. I'm going to go ahead and use the transform type in tool with the scale, just to go ahead and scale this stuff down. Turn off snaps right there. And it looks like it's positioned right on top of the surface. And I'm going to say that I like that size for the books. But you'll notice that there's obviously the books don't match up with the shelf. There's too many books for the shelf. So I'm not going to delete any of the books. What I'm going to do instead is, let me close that. I'm going to end this video here now that we placed a whole bunch of this stuff. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and randomize these books, and we're going to use some pretty simple techniques that I'm going to show you to make this look more realistic.